On April 17th, 2023, King Drew students were invited to hear from a guest speaker whose family had personally been affected by the Japanese incarceration camps. Students are culminating their unit on World War II and the incarceration camps with the essential question, is there such a thing as a justified war? And why did the U.S. enter World War II? What does it mean to be loyal to one's country? And how did Japanese Americans resist? Little did students know that the guest speaker was their one and only English teacher, Mrs. Agena. And here is her family story.
I'm Mrs. Agena. Some of you don't know me. I'm an English teacher here, full-time on campus, King Drew. Taught in LA Unified over 30 years, so probably close to double the amount you've been alive. I've been working. And LAUSD student, LAUSD teacher all the way. Still live here, grown and raised. I was born in Compton, down the street somewhere at a fraternity hospital, whatever those were. That doesn't even exist anymore probably. And raised in the South Bay area and still live in the community. So, yay.
Do you want to go over this first before we go over the questions?
Oh, okay.
And just, I know we used some of this content last year as well. Next month is, every month we celebrate a heritage. What heritage are we celebrating next month?
Asian American Pacific Islander.
Yes, Asian American Pacific Islander month. So this is kind of in preparation for that, okay? Ms. Agena, anything you want to share about this slide?
I feel like there was a slide before this last year, but maybe not.
No.
Oh, because it's for an everyday person. So now I believe the term is Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Island, so that the Native Hawaiians have a different way of referencing themselves. So that's why it says AANHPI. So I think the question was, do I have an everyday AANHPI person of influence for me? And I gave Ms. Lopez this slide because my parents obviously lived through World War II, and so some of the reason why I'm here is to share part of their story. My mother actually, though, was a secretary, what we now call the school administrative assistant, or back in those days, I think they were called office managers, in LAUSD for 27 years. So yes, I have a legacy here in this district. And then my father was a general contractor here in Los Angeles. We kind of wonder, can you not hear me?
Oh, no, I can hear you.
Oh, okay.
I was just wondering, what does AANHPI stand for?
So it stands for Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders. You're welcome. So, and we kind of wonder if my father was the first licensed Japanese American general contractor in Los Angeles, thanks to an African American gentleman who kind of apprenticed him after the war, because after the war, obviously people were not friendly to Japanese Americans. So someone took him under his wing and allowed him to learn the craft and then get licensed for it. So, and they were both forcibly evacuated during World War II under the Executive Order 9066 that you saw earlier. So I know that looks like just a piece of paper or a picture in your history book, but to my family that was a very strong symbol of what was a defining event. I think it's almost an understatement to say it's a defining event for Japanese Americans and their families since World War II. So, do you want me to say about the story?
Yeah, you could share about your story.
Okay, so they were forcibly evacuated in different ways. So my mother, I don't know how far you went in your history classes, but when they started what we now call, back in those days, I think in my class we talked about euphemisms, right? And they were called internment camps. That sounds so almost nice, right? They got to go somewhere, get paid for by the government, all their food and lodging. But actually we now call them incarceration centers, which is what they were. They were legit prison camps, right? And a camp is not like summer camp. You go swimming and you make crafts, right? they were surrounded by barbed wire and soldiers with guns, and they had to stay in these pretty inhospitable places, right? So, so that's where my mother went. My mother went to Manzanar is probably the one that's most famous here in this state because it's here in California. But she went to the one, even though she was raised here in El Monte, you know what that is? They had a farm in El Monte, but they were evacuated first to Santa Anita as an assembly center. How many of you know what Santa Anita is? It's still that way today. What's the most famous place in Santa Anita? Well, maybe that's not, maybe it's the horse.
Have you heard of
racetracks? Racing horses? Okay, all right, now I get some nods. Okay, so it's a racetrack where they race horses even today. But then, for a moment, it was an evacuation center, so they had to have people come to a place to assemble. Once they saw the notice go up in the neighborhood, they had so many days to make sure they packed up their belongings and only what they could carry, and go to an assembly center. So Santa Anita was the assembly center my mother went to, and guess where they stayed until they could get shipped out? In a horse stall. And so you'll see many stories, you'll read many stories. This is not uncommon for the evacuees at that time to talk about how they went to Santa Anita. They had to sleep in the horse stall. Sometimes they were not cleaned out. They were given a burlap bag and some straw, and there was your bed until they could get notified on what train they were going to get put on, so they knew what camp eventually that they would go to. So people in Santa Anita were on trains all over the country, right? And she was taken to Poston, Arizona, which was one of the larger camps. They had 2 centers there. So she, I think, was in Poston 1, is what they called it. Again, really in the middle of the desert, next to the Gila River, I think is what I learned. I've never been there. My father was forcibly evacuated a different way. So his story is that my father grew up in the Central Valley, also farming community farmers. My grandfather, his father, taught kendo. You know, like who's the Avenger, Marshall, you know, whatever, the hero with the stick, you know, okay, right, okay, that's called kendo, right? And my grandfather taught martial art. He taught kendo, but because then he taught kendo and was considered a community leader, because he taught a martial art, he was taken away, we believe, by the FBI, just arrested in the middle of the night. And they didn't know where he was for about 1.5 years. Meantime, this evacuation is happening. So I think my dad was pretty young. I think he must have been 20, maybe. And he had 2 sisters that were already married, so they evacuated. They might have gone to Manzanar with their husbands and family, and had a younger brother, and his mother, because they didn't know where dad was, right? So they evacuated. They had a choice of going to camp or to move inland. So they chose to move inland. So they moved to Utah, not just a little inland, they moved a few states away. And they became sharecroppers on a land, shared a house with other families, and sharecrop land in Utah. Sugar beets, I think, was what the main crop was. And so that's what he chose to do, right? Until they found out where dad went after 1.5 years. And now we believe he was in what was called a war relocation center. So there were 2 kind of like prison centers where they took people they arrested. Some were forts, like military forts, and some were they call them, another euphemism, war relocation centers. And so we think that he was in one of those. But I've never gotten to really track it all the way down to see. So that's the history. That's the 1, 2, 3. So Issei is first generation. Okay, Ni means 2, so the Nisei are the 2nd generation. And most of the Niseis are born here. So it didn't matter whether or not you were Nisei or not. You were an American citizen, you were forced to go, one way or another, evacuated forcibly after Pearl Harbor. Okay. and Sunset, so I'm his son, so.
That's a third generation. Y'all better remember those vocabulary words. I said thank you to Ms. Agena because sometimes we have hard stories or stories that we're shy to share, right? We're like, oh, I'm shy to share about myself and my family. So it does take bravery to be up here and like, I want to share with not only just random people, but with my students, right? A little bit about myself. So I have 3 questions. And the first question I want to ask you is, in your family history, do you have memories of your family discussing or not discussing the effects of the incarceration camps or World War II in your community?
So it's both. Right? So because the camps were so, of course, impactful, we were really well aware that that happened, that was an important part of their lives, of course. So my mother I think had just graduated high school. So she'll talk about camps in a way that it seemed like fun. I think she was young enough that it didn't, what she was trying to say, it didn't impact her the same way as for her parents. To feel like they lost everything, of course. For her, it was sort of like an extension of high school. She's probably not gonna say it that way, but all the young people, it was a place for them to all be in the same place at the same time, right? And so it was a social thing. And so she didn't feel the impact of it that way as like that, in the same way as her parents did. So in that way, we were both very aware of what our parents, what happened, let me say it that way. What I say is they also did not talk about it, is it wasn't, in our family at least, and I don't think mine is uncommon, we didn't get the emotional impact. They didn't get into how it felt. Now part of that is cultural, you think about the samurai, you're stoic and you suck up feelings, right? That whole Asian, Japanese, American stereotype, right? Which is partly cultural. But also, if you think about what they had to go through, there's a saying in Japanese, and you'll see it in many readings if you read about the camps or that time, that the philosophy was shikatakanai. It means it can't be helped. Okay. So if it can't be helped, what is your talk about, right? You just gut it up and you get through it. So there's another word I was talking to students about. It's called gaman. And gaman, it has layers of meaning, but it means endure with dignity. So when you have to go through something, you just gaman. It's usually a fist, I don't know if it's a fist or both, whenever you say gaman. So I think the emotional part, that as an older person with my own family, you realize, dang, that was a lot. And in fact, when my mother, I think my mother was one of the first people to be released from camp. And they're not, my parents were not in certain year, they weren't like that. They just said, well, this happened. So we kind of have to go back and figure out that when she left camp, they were starting to let people out little by little. Each camp, I think, had a different release date. And her friend, she had a couple of friends who went to Chicago. And so when she left, she went to go live with them in Chicago. They lived in a tenement, like a slum, like it was bed bugs, and they didn't have enough beds. So she talks about how they work different hours, and so when one person would roll out of the bed, someone would come home and roll into the bed, and so there was never a cold bed in the house because somebody was always sleeping at different times. And then, here's the deal, her parents were still in camp, okay, when she left. Then, at some point, her mother got sick in camp. So my mother went back into camp to take care of her mother until her mother died in camp. And then she left again and came here to California at that point. So if I had to do that, I'd be like, wow, that'd be really deep, right? Really hard. So, but my mother, she talked about it that's pretty, oh. So there is a very much a talking and awareness about it, but at the same time, there's a lot that's not talked about.
Can we give another thank you to Ms. Agena? A lot of the resiliency that Black, Indigenous, people of color, Asian folks, Japanese folks had to just find, right? The resiliency to say, I need this strength to survive. It's not even an option. Like, this is what I need to survive. So my next question is, as we think about our shared stories, right? We are different races and ethnicities, but we are, you and I, this again is my homegirl, you know, we connect, we share about a lot of stuff. Although, right, we share different races and ethnicities, right? Different cultures. What is in common about, you know, a Black and brown experience in LA versus your experience as a Japanese American person in LA? What are the common areas, or what was it like to share that experience in Los Angeles?
Okay, there's a couple layers. I think because I grew up here, I was always used to having people that are different than me around me, right? I mean, when I go to different parts even of the state where there are people who don't look like me or people who don't look like you, it's like, oh, this is different, this is kind of weird. What is this like, right? So on that level, I think I've always enjoyed being in a community where people don't look like me. However, I also feel like I've been in a community where at least there's someone who looks like me. So I've appreciated that about growing up here in this part of Los Angeles in particular. What was the other part of the question? Oh, what's the same or different?
Yeah, the same or
I
different
think,
experiences.
I think sometimes in LA, we're not as aware of what it's like when we go outside the community, right? And people are not used to people who look like you. Right? And here's the thing that I think it came on me slowly because I grew up here, is even to go to different parts of LA sometimes, it's like, oh, I'm the only one who looks like me in this room, you know, of like 300 people or 100 people or 60 people, depending on, even in LA Unified, going to workshops or stuff. So there is this inescapableness about how you look. Like, I can't change in a minute how I look. So therefore, I'm gonna be looked at a certain way. I'm gonna be, certain assumptions are gonna be made about me that I can't control. And I think that's kind of daunting, and that's what's the effect of World War II, right? They couldn't do anything or go anywhere because that's how they looked. And so that was part of the reason they got targeted the way they did as well. And so how you look, and I know I benefit from racism two ways. You know, people think I teach math. I know my students, I know, but why do they think that? That Asians are so good at math, and I was so bad. I became an English teacher. So sometimes people think I know how to do things when I don't because of this face. I've been asked, do you speak English? And I was at Disneyland, like my own business, and said, do you speak English? It didn't even dawn on me initially why you're asking me. Oh, you asked me because I look to you like I don't. So yes.
Yeah, and I feel like those are the shared experiences that I understand with you around, like, Ms. Lopez, are you the Spanish teacher? And I'm like, girl, I'll teach you Spanish, history in Spanish if you want, but I'm not a Spanish teacher, or you know, we speak English, right? And as I get older, you know, I'm a señora now. We were like, oh, doña, right? And I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting to that age now, right? But like the experiences of shared experiences, right, that are important.
I think it's important also to be aware that the benefit of the civil rights movement for Japanese Americans, and ultimately we were able to get, my parents were able to get redress for what happened to them in World War II. And I think a lot of that has to do with the civil rights movement, and that my community stands on the shoulders of the Black community for that. And for the solidarity of that happening in the 70s. So I had to say that.
Yeah.
Yes,
Right,
yes.
an African American Black person.
But the college unrest that happened in the 70s, because I got tagged to teach a class to teachers last year, so I learned a lot about that history that I didn't know about. that in the 1970s, when students were actually holding sit-ins and some strikes to set up minority studies classes on campus. Those were not a given back in the day. So students had to activate for those. So it was during that time period where a lot of the Black community and the Asian community on those campuses came together to advocate for those rights.
Yeah, and we're gonna get to learn actually in our next unit about how solidarity was important, right? Solidarity meaning the connection between peoples of different identities and how that led to beautiful things like ethnic studies, to even me being able to teach something like this, right? There are some states right now that I would get fired for talking about the Japanese incarceration camps, right? So what that means, because of the Black community's civil rights movement and solidarity that happened, right? That's why it's also very powerful, and I hope you take this in, because in some states, some cities, kids aren't allowed to learn about this. Okay, so hopefully this is
happening right now.
Right now, we're talking about like yesterday. There's policies that are being signed. Okay, a lot of powerful stuff. Any questions for
After the incarceration camps, how was for your parents and how did it affect you growing up?
Oh, okay. So,
how did it affect you growing up after?
I mean, for me, I just grew up in this community, so I didn't experience a lot of problems particularly. I know that my mother talked about after the war, when she came out here, like she lived in Santa Monica, she went to Santa Monica Community College, and that happened as a result of being sponsored, you know, the sponsorships.
Like they paid for you?
I guess they paid for people to come out to get out of camp. And so she, I don't know how she heard about it, but she was sponsored by the Missionary Baptist Society of Los Angeles or something like that. And so she got to come out to Santa Monica, and she worked in someone's home, taking care of the kids in a house and stuff. And so, but the time she went to college, she walked to wherever, the bus stop or whatever, and people would water their lawns, because they didn't have sprinklers. And they would water the lawn so she couldn't cross the sidewalk without getting wet. There were like these really passive kinds of things. Again, my parents didn't really talk about kind of negativity. You know, that was sort of the biggest thing she would say. So I'm sure it was difficult, and people were not receptive.
Right.
Yeah.
Those are the lingering actions of
The war.
And all that stuff, right? And if you hear your question being answered, you could just let me know, because I know we have a few with their questions. Let me know after class, okay? I'm gonna allow someone not in my class, if you have a question. What's your name there?
Kendall? Being a teacher, how do you feel like the educational system can be better at teaching us important events like this and giving us a better understanding of this type of history?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. That's really good.
Extra credit. Oh, okay.
I'm grateful for teachers like Ms. Lopez and here at Kinju, where my parents' experience is not just this big on a history book page. It's one in a paragraph. When I went to I went to high school, I mean, it was kind of like.
Where did you go to high school?
Oh, I went to Brady High School. So, I mean, I told you. So, it was like this much in the history book, right? So I'm grateful that that is getting more attention, and especially now as we see the rise of Asian hate in the country, then it's becoming more and more important for that narrative to be told alongside representation.
Thank you, Kendall. Anyone else have a question? We're gonna go with Melissa and then we'll go.
Were you still able to connect to your culture?
Oh, yeah, I mean, in some ways, yeah. I mean, I'm lucky to grow up here in this part of LA, I guess. So I assume now, as I'm talking to you, like many peoples of color, right? They banded together in different ways, community groups, church groups, those kinds of things. And so, for example, I went to a Baptist church growing up, not like Buddhist or something, but there was one in my community. So you kind of either went to the Baptist church or you went to the Buddhist church. And they were predominantly Asian American, Japanese American. So in that way, I got to socialize with people who looked like me or whatever, but also had cultural themes. So even in Gardena, at the Buddhist church, every summer, they have what's called an Obon festival. Like a Karate Kid, remember that one kid in their dancing?
There's a new one now, but yeah.
Well, they're dancing, are they dancing in the kimonos and doing all that, right? And they dance in a circle. So they still do that. And in certain parts, in churches and different parts of this community up and down the state. So you can go do that, you can just do it for fun, it's a community event, they have their practices, you get there, you do the moves, I'm really bad at it. But, there's things and opportunities to learn language. I never did, but my brothers and sisters went to Japanese school. So yeah, in some ways, yeah, I'm connected to the Japanese American National Museum, because it's here in LA. So there are ways for me to learn about my own culture.
You stay connected. Given that you're a third generation, right?
Yeah, some are moved.
Right. Any other questions from this side of the room?
Were there any times where you or your parents were afraid or felt like it would go back to being like that?
Can you say it a little louder?
Were you or your parents ever afraid or felt like there would be times where it could go back to how it was, like with the concentration camps?
Fear that history can repeat itself.
Oh, for sure. Because I think we still look different. Right? And there's still people who will base their suspicions or their fears based on people who look different. And there's nothing I can do about that. Right? I can't change how I look. I can't pass. So I think there's always that fear. I think, in COVID, where they traced the COVID back to China and all that, the rise of Asian hate went up because this thing came from China, and it was okay, do I have to be more careful when I take my walk? Because I'm on Zoom all morning, can I go take my walk safely, even in my own neighborhood? Do I have to carry pepper spray or, just because you hear different things, right? Hostility now. So I think there's that. I think after 9/11, when Arab Americans got targeted because of what happened with the attacks of Saddam Hussein and so on. So then, there was talks of camps. I don't know if you knew that, because you guys were pretty young. But people talked about, let's round them all up and put them in camps. It's like, wow, that's still in people's minds. Let's just put all these people somewhere and stick them away where we can control them. And so that's very much a part of the American consciousness, even though it doesn't seem like it.
Yeah, many would argue it's happening to Central Americans right now, right? I have people that are in detention centers right now. People are like, wait, those aren't detention centers, those are concentration camps, or those are prisons, right? Because you're Central American and undocumented. So the realities of it repeat themselves. I'm gonna go with Talaya, and then after Talaya, Chin, after Chin. Okay, well, Carson, okay.
When you come to your office, you afraid, or does that bring back any more memories?
I don't know about memories, because my parents' experience was different than mine, and my parents are already gone. So, but the sort of polemical thinking, you're either this or you're that, you're either with me or against me, yeah, it's a big concern. And just the need to blame and not come together, it just seems so far out there. But it's scary how much was hidden, I guess. Yeah.
And the consequences of just having one paragraph, right, about this history, it possibly repeating again. Yeah. Chin?
How was it being Japanese American in high school?
How, what?
A little louder.
How was it being Japanese American in high school?
Oh, well, at Gardena at that time, it was probably 25% Asian, not Japanese, but Asian. And so, and that doesn't sound like a lot because we're a small school, but at that time, Gardena had 3,000 students. It was twice as big as Kingsville. So 25% is a big number. So that was not so bad because there were people who looked like me, you know. But still, there was sort of this racism thing like going on because you sort of, the races didn't, we were like big into brotherhood, brotherhood camp and having these talks, you know, about race, and that was like really forward thinking and whatever. So there was a lot of work. The races, quote unquote, didn't necessarily mix. And so you did sort of have to kind of keep in mind who you were and where you were and who you were with. And it was still a lot of work to do, being people together.
Would you all say that's similar still at King Drew, like race and ethnicity separate? Or do you feel like we come together? I see something. Any other questions? I see hands here. This is my class and I know we have Messi over there. Okay, so, were your hands up? Okay, I'm gonna go here and then I'm gonna come back to my class, okay? Because I wanna give them a fair opportunity. Go for it, Savannah.
Yeah. How did your parents cope with or heal from their experiences in the incarceration camps? Do you think that they ever like fully healed from it, or that there was still a part of them that kind of, I don't want to say died, but like died in that?
Yeah, you know, because of the stoic part of the culture, I think the culture gave them the ability to deal with it because it was sort of a cultural thing they understood. Like we're just gonna push through it, we're just gonna endure. We don't talk about our feelings, you know, that whole samurai thing, right? So I think in that way it helped them. But I also think, you know, just as what we know now psychologically about ourselves as people, you had to suppress a lot. And so I kind of wonder about feelings and, you know, we didn't talk about feelings in my family. So, but I also think, so, you know, I think there's a detriment. You know, I kind of think about institutional trauma. It's not institutional trauma. That's institutional trauma, isn't it? Just because maybe there was the need for safety, right? The need to deal with uncertainty was paramount because you didn't have safety, right? So you had to be more sort of, everything had to be planned, you know, everything, your life had to go a certain way. Like my mother was probably not real happy that I was not good in math. You know, she wanted me to be an accountant, which is like, I just can't. I tell my classmates all the time, like, the time is it, how many minutes?
Yeah.
Because I can't do
Like, y'all get A's because I don't know.
You know, so to have your life planned ahead and to make sure everything goes a certain way is really strong. And so there's not a lot of maybe freedom as much as, you know, what we might say our dominant culture counterparts might have.
We can say it. Our European American.
Our European American
Counterparts.
culture mainstream counterparts. I think too, I think what my parents did come, because neither one of them graduated college. My mother went to community college, but I'm not sure got her AA, right? And my dad only got his high school diploma. So education, like my mother's like, I don't care what you major in, I don't care what you do, but you will get a college degree. So that was sort of a given in my family. I didn't have a choice. I didn't get to think about it, right? So I think that was one of the good things that came out of it, that they lost their opportunity. That's also why I vote, even though it's inconvenient sometimes to figure out that ballot, like, I don't know, right? But I vote because my parents' right to vote as an American citizen got taken away. And so I don't ever take that for granted. Right. So I think they would say they had a good life. They accomplished a lot. We lived comfortably. I did not know, you know, that we suffered for anything, but I'm sure there were some tightening. You know, certain things as you look back as an adult, you go, oh, that was, oh, they probably were struggling, right? But I wouldn't have known that. So I think they would say they lived a good life.
We're gonna go with Carson.
Okay. So how did your parents or anyone you knew who went through the internment camps, like what did they do to keep their morale up? What did they do to pass the time?
Oh, yeah, so I had to do some reading about that. And I heard some stories. So, I know my mother had I was trying to find it today, I always can't find it. But you'll see, if you ever go to the Japanese International Museum, they'll have a whole, their central exhibit is about the incarceration centers, right? And you'll see the kinds of hobbies that they did. So, I mean, they're in the middle of the desert, right? So when they found a piece of wood, for example, they would carve it and make these pins. And so you'll see all these different pins from all over the different camps, people have donated. And my mother had a whole box of them, and she swears my father didn't know them. But they're probably in the garage somewhere, okay? But you'll see all these intricately carved pins, they used to carve. Some were managed to make gardens in the desert, and they would haul water to make these little Japanese gardens by their little barracks. So I don't know if you've seen pictures. Have you seen pictures?
They've seen some pictures, my students have, I don't know.
So it just looks like a bungalow made of like plank, like wood plank, like probably this, that's it. Not this nice, right? That's what they lived in. So they had to tar paper them, but even outside they'll just they would dig down and put dirt and make gardens. Yeah, so it's just like that, literally, just a plank. And then I guess just some sports, they would organize, they kind of made their own communities. And maybe taught martial arts or whatever. The fact that you have any pictures at all came much later as far as of camps. Because obviously the government's not going to have a camera and take pictures, right, of such things. And so that came much later through he's kind of famous, in our community. His name is Toyo Miyatake. And he made his own camera and he smuggled in photographic paper. This is way back in the day.
Pieces of like the camera.
Yeah, and then he put, you had to put paper in the camera and then you had to expose it, then you had to go buy chemicals and you guys are doing what I'm talking about.
They only know Instagram.
Yeah, that's what they had to do. So they actually had Ansel Adams. He's a famous American photographer who went, and Dorothy Lang, who went through the country, took pictures. And so you have some pictures of like Manzanar, thanks to Ansel Adams. And then you have later pictures like these, maybe. Maybe that one, I'm not sure. Taken by people who smuggled in.
Right.
Yeah.
And we have, I did share with them also, I know we have some folks that just came in, the pictures. This was a student of mine that actually took pictures a few years ago of if you go visit Manzanar today. But them trying to leave things as they were so that people can see what the experience was like. Okay.
So you see that's like desert.
Oh yeah, it is. It's windy.
Cold.
It's cold. One hour it's windy, the other hour it's hot. Middle of nowhere. You can't run to anywhere. So we have a question here, and then we're gonna go to me. You had a question. So I think these are gonna be our last two questions. Okay, just because of time. So Tamia, can you ask your question? And then we'll
While in the incarceration camps, did your family ever run out of supplies? Like, I heard you mention that, I guess the government was giving them food and stuff like that. Was that after or before? And how much food was it given? What type of food was it?
So they do talk about that. My mother, okay, you know what spam ham? I love spam. Do you know what spam is? That's in ham. In Hawaii, it's like great. But my mother didn't like to eat spam because that's the kind of food. Basically you got military food, which back then was great. I don't even know, it's like powder. But powdered milk, powdered eggs. They got canned peaches that they put on top of white people's rice. You know, it's not Japanese rice. So it's not like sushi rice, it's like Uncle Ben's rice. They put canned peaches on top of it because I guess that was good to them. Yeah.
And this wasn't for months, this is for years. we're talking about.
So you used to go like to the mess hall, like just like you see on television for the army, you go to the mess hall certain times. You line up, you get your tray, you get food from the mess hall. So they got that kind of food, but the food that they're used to, or Japanese food, and then, so in that way, they got their basic necessities, I guess, met.
What's your name?
Harvard.
What's your question?
So that image to the far, like the far left, is that monument? Is that in Northern California somewhere?
It's about 4 hours away from here, 3 hours and a half away from here. That's in Manzanar. So I was sharing with some of my students going towards Six Flags.
Okay.
Have you been there?
Yeah, I've been there 25 years ago. Has anyone been to the High Sierras, like to Mammoth, go skiing? Okay, no.
We're gonna go to.
Yeah, we're going in a couple weeks.
In a couple weeks to go visit.
So they have a pilgrimage to Manzanar, and it's a community event. It's about halfway, you're like the peak behind there is the highest peak in California. Is it the highest peak in the continent of Mexico? Highest peak in California? Mount Whitney. So it's in the foothills of Mount Whitney, and it's about, it's halfway between here and Mammoth. If you've ever been to driving like Highway 395.
And it's a place you can visit. Like you can go on the weekend with your parents to a museum and check us out. What's your name? Orlando. That'll be our last question, and see if anybody else. Orlando.
I was wondering, are you like happy with how things like turned out, or do you like want more like retribution?
I mean, my parents were given reparations. I mean, nothing is gonna be enough, right? They lost everything. It changed the course of their lives, and I'm sure their psychological understanding of themselves and where they belong in this country, right? So it's hard to monetize that in terms of reparations. So in terms of retribution, I'm pretty sure my parents don't know a lot of, that's not their way to think of in terms of retribution, I could get even. But I think certainly as their children understanding differently, going through the civil rights movement, and so I have older brothers, they were flower children and all that in the 1960s and early 70s. So I think we would probably be more vigilant, that once we see the things and we see unrest and we see causes for injustice based on race, I think we're more vigilant about being aware of what that really could mean, because it happened to our families. And hopefully more committed to working against it. So whether it's the rise in Asian hate or just what's going on in the country now that is so divisive against people of color and people of different gender, and all of the things, I can't name them all, but all of the things, right, that we're just more aware of. There needs to be greater inclusion, greater understanding. We're much more powerful together than we are split.
Much more powerful together than